I feel I want to go back to smart contracts that you mentioned there, and also floods triggered an idea that I didn't have time to discuss on the presentation that we did for GMIT, which is basically, you know how governments issue funds for, let's say, earthquake or floods or some kind of natural disaster, and then it's hard to use those funds like aimed specifically at individual targets. They kind of try to do it more region based. I feel that when we start implementing blockchain, and let's say you have 1,000 farmers in a specific region that are using origin chain network and they are reporting their data, and next month they're hit by a huge flood or tornado or whatever, the government could technically say, all right, you're hooked up to this network and you are in this region that we see from satellite images. These 25 farms and these 10 small farmers there should directly get this percentage of the funds because you're specifically in that region, which we can see and track. And in my mind, it can be like smart contract triggered. So if the weather reporting station reports to the app or the program that something happened to that region, the funds are automatically transferred to the wallets of the farmers where they get money that can help them. You know, at the start, it will probably be rough estimates or some kind of average per farm, but it could be implemented in a way where you don't have to wait for like months and months to get some funds for the region, but you could specifically target farmers that are specifically there, and you can see them 10 kilometers in that direction, 5 kilometers in that direction. These farmers need to receive that much money to help them, you know, kind of rebuild their farms or evacuate the cattle or like buy new machinery or repair buildings and things like that, by directly targeting them through using their own data that they were providing.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting because you're touching on a number of different things there. Yes, that is completely possible if you have an integrated software system that is integrated between public services, public administration, public sector, and those communities, which can either be regionally based or they could be connected through co-ops, right? So we mainly think about the food supply chain. Once farmers are licensed by the government, once product leaves the farm gate, it becomes part of the food chain.
Yeah.
And what's happening now is that because of ubiquitous computing or digital transformation across the sector and the demand for greater transparency into food supply chain, including environmental impact, we are seeing the dissolving of barriers between, let's say, primary, secondary, and tertiary industries. Mm-hmm. So they have been really quite clearly defined, I think, in the past. And there's been, points where logistic services comes to the farm gate, and we don't really see it as all being connected. Now with the farm to fork movement, we can see integrated data being a requirement. Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about there is government intervention in disaster mode, and we have seen the massive shift globally in what has happened with government responses to let's say furloughing in the past couple of years, with the extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in now, and how governments intervened to essentially remove all barriers to receipt of furlough funding, because the cost of auditing it is not worth the potential loss of misclaims, let's say. So decisions now, and those initial decisions were made, they probably thought that would be like a temporary 3-month thing, or whatever those decisions were made and based on. But that accelerated access to funding, removing barriers like that, because the cost of individual audits is so great in time and in human oversight or algorithmic oversight, that it doesn't make sense to put them in there, particularly if what we're going to do, as happened with furlough payments, was a sort of baseline was defined regardless of what your income was. There's a baseline defined, and workers could sign up to receive it with very low barriers. So I think you're talking about that, and what is the greatest facilitator of that happening is that shift on the side of the public. It's a game-changing perspective shift on the part of public administration.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was, I think, in the 1990s, there was a shift in how, let's say, public sector administration saw their service users. They saw patients in the health system were clients. All of the language, I bet you even in prisons, they started calling prisoners clients of the prison system. So these kind of shifts are indicative of how services and policies regard the role and responsibility of public administration. And things like that. So here what we're talking about in the food system is something that butts up between, so we're an industry provider, we have the farming community who are individual business enterprises, essentially, right? So there's individual businesses, we're a business provider, a software service provider, essentially at the cutting edge of digital transformation in Europe. We receive our funding through Europe. We're R&D funding. We're ahead of the wave of essentially what is the pathway through food regulation, safety regulation, reporting regulation. And we are utilizing the mechanism afforded by distributed ledger technology. So this essentially, going back to our beginning conversation, reformats that sense of trust across the internet. And but what do we do with that? Do we buy shoes, or do we deliver emergency funding into an area so that they can create mitigation pathways at the soonest opportunity, if that is the right thing that needs to happen? So that constitutes massive policy shift and behavioral change on the part of public administration. So we're kind of in this mix of, like, one thing moving ahead, another thing moving ahead, and that is the requirement, essentially. That's the environment of, because it's one thing for one farmer to decide, you know what, I am going to document everything that I do on my mobile phone, and I am going to have the perfect record for all eternity, so that my children and my grandchildren will know what I did in the fields. So you've got that, right? And a single farmer could do that, and that would be a really interesting record, and it would probably help them with their record keeping. But unless there is a pathway to sharing that in an integrated way, which adds value by let's say that farmer decides to do that and convinces everybody else in the co-op to do the same thing, so that now we've got a region or an area, Tipperary co-op. All the farmers, dairy farmers in Tipperary, are now documenting for posterity how they are dealing with their peripheral habitats. That would be an amazing thing. That all of a sudden now that becomes really valuable to dairy Tipperary co-op, but also to the government. All of a sudden they've got this county in the middle of Ireland where they've got all of this data about peripheral habitat management, which is about carbon footprinting.
And it also becomes super valuable for the brand, if I can just jump in there, because if you're buying, let's say, a product from Tipperary, and you can also see the data farmers are reporting that they're doing everything as they should, then you automatically have more trust in the products that they're bringing to the supermarkets, right? Because then you can buy a product where it says grass fed, and you can literally check if the farmers did leave their cows on the fields, right? And you were like, okay, yes, they did. So now it's checked, it's confirmed, and you trust the butter from Tipperary more.
Yeah, but like imagine if what they're also doing is participating in um, wildlife surveys. So now we have ubiquitous information right across Tipperary about wild pheasant counts. Not that we would necessarily want to publish it because we don't want to have hunters coming here and destroying them, but so Birdwatch Ireland conduct bird surveys, and we would perhaps have a more complete record of nesting pairs,
Mm-hmm.
of wildlife that's at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That will actually be tremendous because it will have a huge impact in the long term, because I feel that most of these effects you can't see overnight, but in, let's say, a 20-year span, you will see a huge effect. It will be like the compounding effect curve, where at the start it's like nothing happening, and then after a few years you can see a huge change. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see the full version, go to the Uncle Gold Podcast YouTube channel or watch the next clip.